Hey guys, welcome to, I think this is podcast 16. I actually did make sure to check. I don't know why I didn't check before, but who gives a shit? Why are my starts so awkward? Okay.
It's
welcome
fine.
to this podcast. See, I don't even have control over my own podcast. Way to go. Way to go. But yeah, welcome to this podcast, Zero the Hero. How are you today?
Poofy, 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 poofy.
Okay, you're retired. What? No, I changed my name.
No.
It is back to Poofer Llama. I should get some respect.
And this is a petition in the podcast to bring it back to the original. Poofer Yama's Poofy, come on.
What the hell? Honey, my wife is nearby, and I'm already being called Poofy on my podcast.
But you're always Poofy.
No. God damn it.
If constantly repeating Poofy brings back a sense of deja vu, hello, I hope you're doing well. That's my name in Twitch. But actually, I go by ZerotheHero. So, yeah, I'm a pretty vocal player, kind of young too. I always trash talk Nioh, even though I like it. This trend, trash talking the games you like. This is how we roll.
Ah, yes.
And
abusive relationships.
Well, it's a nice abusive relationship. You see, there's a difference.
Oh my god!
I use gentle language to make it seem better, and it's an honor to be in the widely acclaimed, prestigious Poofy Yama podcast. Thank you, Poofy, for having me here.
Good to have you too. In any case, let's talk about, I guess, issues that you think are biggest, or just in general, what you feel you want to talk about. Anything besides my username. But what brings you here today? What would you like to talk about in today's podcast? What are the things that you feel need to be addressed in this game? And what are some of the unique perspectives that you've gained as being a younger Nioh player? So most of the audience, for those of you who don't know, most of the audience are typically... from what I've seen, at least in my demographics and statistics and whatnot, they tend to be adults to older adults. This game isn't necessarily advertised to say the same types of players who play Fortnite. And I'm not saying Zero the Hero is of that audience whatsoever, but he certainly comes from the younger age spectrum. So what interested you about Nioh in the first place?
So, okay, well, I honestly think about how I got into Nioh, and it's a bit weird. The thing is, in 2017, I bought a PlayStation 4, and the reason why I bought it is for Persona 5 and Nioh Automata. My parents were like, well, you should buy some more games, because only 2 games might be a bit boring. And that was a bad choice in their part, because I had like 100 hours plus in Persona 5, 120 in Nioh Automata, so it wasn't really necessary. But yeah, we bought more games, and I bought Bloodborne because before that, when I was really young, I was really, really into Dark Souls. Like, Dark Souls was my thing. I made all different kinds of builds: Fate, Dexterity, Myths, Intelligence, and then Quality, all those kind of things. I played through the game, many different paths. Like, when you first play Dark Souls, you have to beat Blighttown and the Gargoyles, right? Usually most people go for the Gargoyles first, but I went to Blighttown first several times because I'm such an addict to the game and I love exploring the different routes. So that shows how much I'm into Dark Souls. So the thing is, when I bought that PlayStation 4, I was sort of in my decline of Dark Souls. I didn't really realize it at the time, but I was starting to not really like Dark Souls. But even then, I bought Bloodborne, and I also bought Nioh. And I really don't know why I bought Nioh, because I think it was kind of new at the time, 2017. And I needed to buy a 4th game, and I'm like, should I really buy Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3? That seems like a bit overkill. So I'm like, sure, Nioh. I've heard some good things about it, but I have no idea. And I really hated Nioh the first time I played it, because I played it like Dark Souls, but I hated Dark Souls. And that seems oxymoronic, but it shows the big problem with Nioh's accessibility. And I just really hated the game. I got up to Nioh, and then I quit completely. And yeah, I didn't really touch the game for a while, until the Lord and Savior of all Nioh players. Who is it, Pufferyama? Tell me. Who is the Lord and Savior of all skilled Nioh players? Tell me.
Are we talking about Puar Gaming? I'm kidding.
No! Excellent Gladiator! How can you...
I'm just... to any Puar Gaming fans, sorry, not sorry. But yes, XLH Gladiator was the first big player and first big YouTuber that really highlighted one of the various ways that you can play Nioh. And yeah, I wasn't into Nioh back then. I came much, much later. But from what I've been told, the OG Nioh scene, XLH Gladiator kind of like blew players' expectations of this game out of the water. So please continue.
No, yeah, he was carrying the game in his back, essentially, because he claims that he's not the best in every game he plays, but that's because he plays so many different action games. And I think the trait that XLH Gladiator really has is that he's able to adapt really quickly to games. So just for every action game playthrough you see of him, he may not be the best, because I was recently getting to Transformers at the station and I saw his play and I'm like, this is good, but this isn't that good. But even then, that was like the first few days of the game. That's insane how good he got. So he was basically carrying the game on his back, and any legacy of the game being technical was basically him. Then I'm pretty sure came Kage. Like he was kind of like going along, and I know he was like doing lots of builds, but then he kind of went to skill gameplay and the last to load. So back when I played Nioh 1, those were the players I aspired to. But I actually didn't play that much Nioh 1 because I had a problem with my PS4 and I quit the game for a bit, and then I wanted to come back for the DLC, but then I couldn't download the DLC, so it was a bit of a pain, and then I never really played the game again. So yeah, I kind of like lost interest in Nioh. But then just randomly, the Nioh 2 beta came out, and I'm like, sure, why not? And I got hooked all over again. So that's basically my story. I've been playing Nioh 2, but now not so much, and for issues we'll be talking in the podcast.
Sure. So I guess one question that I have from what you've just stated. So what were the primary reasons for your disinterest in Nioh, and what was it about the Nioh 2? And we're talking about which demo? Are we talking about the first one, the alpha that was closed? Or are we talking about the public beta? Just the public beta.
Yes, in November. And it was by complete accident, because I knew about the alpha that came out a few months ago, but it was because I was just browsing the PlayStation Store, and I'm like, oh, Nioh 2 beta. Like, it was such a huge coincidence, because if it wasn't for that, because, TN is really bad at advertising their games, so I didn't even know about the beta. And I'm like, oh, cool, there's a beta for Nioh 2. I mean, I'm pretty rusty in Nioh, but I may as well go for it. And there wasn't anything intrinsic about Nioh 2 over Nioh 1 that made me play it. It's just because it had been such a long time since I played Nioh, because of the PlayStation 4 problem I had, and like when Nioh 2 beta came out, I had to fix the problem, but it was way too long since I played Nioh, and it was like already way of the Nioh difficulty, and I'm like, holy moly, I really don't want to catch up with all these players. So yeah, I'll just kind of quit the game. But Nioh 2 beta, everyone was on the similar level, so I'm like, oh wow, I can actually start grinding and get up to everyone's level.
I see. So it was just kind of like a fresh start.
Yes.
So I guess that is rather coincidental that it just so happened to be a beta, and you just so happened to be browsing the store. And I do agree that Team Ninja Marketing, or whoever is really responsible for marketing Nioh, I mean, I don't truthfully know who really is in charge of it. Is it Koei Tecmo? Is it, I don't know. But whoever's responsible for marketing Nioh, at least in my opinion, it doesn't really seem like there's anybody really marketing it. I think the one criticism I think the overall player base has had is just that there's a lot of missing information in regards to even just knowing about the game. I mean, the fact that you only happen to find the game demo just purely by chance is, I think, indicative of that. I know I've been critical in the past, at least on the Discord and various other, and pretty much everywhere, I've been critical of the fact that there's no DLC trailers until the day they drop. I'm like, it just feels like it misses the mark, because audiences who wouldn't otherwise know about the game are just not going to know about it. And if those who are most excited about the game are going to already get the DLC and whatnot, irrespective of any trailers. So it just feels like the trailers at the very least are they've kind of fallen on deaf ears anyway. So I can certainly empathize with how you feel that there is pretty much no marketing
but
to this
the problem is
go ahead.
Not also that no marketing, it's that like the little marketing they have. I just came to this realization myself, and you may say it's like a silly theory, but I want to state
Sure.
it anyways, like why the trailers don't hit the mark. Because I could have been on the lookout for the Nioh 2 beta because I was aware of the alpha and I saw the trailers and I saw people talk about it, but it didn't really catch my interest. And it just happened to be because before yesterday, I think I was watching the Matrix movie. I'd never seen it before, right? Because I'm kind of young, but I just happened to watch it. And one thing that everyone talks about is that the choreographed action scenes. There's very few cuts in them, so you see that what's his name, Keanu Reeves, like the main character, like Nioh. You can see that he's very well trained in the martial arts he's doing, and therefore there's very little need for cuts. But in modern cinemas, like a few years ago, we watched a movie. I forgot what's his name? Oh fuck, I forgot the actor, but he's one of the well-known actors. And I told my mom, I really disliked the movie because there were so many cuts. I couldn't even keep up with the action. And just watching the Matrix movie made me realize something. The Nioh trailers have so many cuts in them. And when you compare them to Ninja Gaiden, you'll see that the Ninja Gaiden trailers have way less cuts. So what do I mean by cuts? Well, if you look at the Ninja Gaiden trailers, especially Black, you'll see that there's a huge amount of uninterrupted gameplay. Of course, there's fancy camera angles that do switch up because it's a trailer, they remove the UI. But you'll see that, Ryu's fighting a cat fiend for a little bit, doing a combo where the cat fiend gets away, but then he does a backflip and the fight is still continuing. You can see the same arena, it's still the same thing. Or when Ryu's fighting Fiend Ryu, one of the Black trailers, like he pops they're fighting a bit. Fiend Ryu pops up the fire wheels. Ryu escapes, and then he does a bit of a wall jump to get away. But that sends him up for an Isudra drop, and it's like completely uninterrupted fight scene. But in all the Nioh trailers, you'll notice is one attack, then cut to a completely different fight with another attack, then cut to another completely different fight, and then cut to another attack. And we can see a semblance between the critics of modern cinema with the fights with these trailers. The critics of modern cinema, they say, okay, these fight scenes are uninteresting because you don't get to see them actually play out because the actors are not really well trained in the arts that they're doing. Well, the same thing here, because there's so many cuts, it's kind of like shying away from a complete battle scene. We don't get to see a full action scene in its whole glory. We don't see the ups, we don't see the downs. It's just complete cuts, and it does make it look kind of epic, but we can make cuts of everything to make it look epic. There's no distinct flavor to it. And I feel like that's one of the main pitfalls of Team Ninja's advertising. They're not confident in the combat that they're showing, even though both of us know that it is good enough to show them an entire fight scene with White Goat, for example. Like if they hired White Goat to do it, he could probably do an amazing fight scene for a trailer, completely uninterrupted in the Ninja Gaiden style. Now, I'm not saying that this would garner 5 million sales like right off the bat, but at least people who are into action games, they would actually get a feel for the game. Like if you show a Ninja Gaiden trailer to a random Joe, they'll be like, oh my god, look, he's jumping. And there's like tension rising because there's one uninterrupted fight. You're not cutting away from one fight to another. There's like, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yes, I certainly understand. Now, though, I can understand why you'd feel that certain trailers, at least modern trailers, tend to go for more flashy, less substantive, I guess, just types of information, as opposed to, as you're saying, the older Ninja Gaiden trailers, which I do remember, were pretty indicative of the combat. Now, I think while it may not be the best way to showcase gameplay, I will say that in terms of just a pure visual flair, the current trailers, I think, are more appealing overall to audiences. Now, I'm going to be more interested in gameplay per se, but I think the trailers that they have produced, at least for the DLCs, are interesting, but they at best just tease the gameplay. I think, though, the biggest pitfall is less to do with the quality of the trailers, for example, and more to do with the fact that the trailers basically are just, they come out too late. I personally
True.
would have thought the trailers would have hit the biggest mark if they came out at least a week before to generate some hype, some excitement. Because again, releasing a trailer, like let's just talk about any Marvel movie. A Marvel movie, if you get the trailer for, let's say, Avengers Endgame, like the day it comes out, it's like, I'm like, that. What's the point of the trailer then? I'm like, I'm just gonna watch the movie. You know, why would I bother watching the trailer altogether? But if you have kind of a drip feed of content or something that comes out, say, you know, a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance, a month in advance, as Marvel did, then it generates a lot of hype and a lot of excitement, which is, of course, why the movies, I mean, this is just one small snippet, but those trailers help generate excitement and anticipation of the final product. And I think that's one thing that the Nioh trailers entirely just missed out on. I think the best success that they had in terms of generating hype and excitement throughout the entire development cycle for Nioh 2 was actually not a trailer whatsoever, but was when they showcased gameplay for the claws. And this was back in DLC 2.
Yes,
when they showcased that, I think there was near universal praise for what was displayed. It was like, all right, here's a scroll, here's someone playing the claws competently and showcasing many different things. I could tell when this gameplay was happening that whoever was playing the game actually had an intent to showcase the weapon as best as they could. So now that we know all the skills with the claws, we can see, hey, they very much plan to use a limitless finisher for the final blow on Benkei. And so seeing that with the fast-paced gameplay with a bunch of new mechanics just made that weapon seem a lot more exciting. And of course, naturally, fists are certainly one of the most beloved weapons. I mean, players just loved using them, period. I like them too.
It's like their favorite weapon.
Yeah, it's like fists are the best. They do everything great, and you know, there's so much praise for them. Right, and I think that's just because Team Ninja, or whoever was behind the person playing, did a great job of showcasing the potential for the weapon. And compare that to, say, the weapon like the Split Staff. Split Staff showcase was like, what, one GIF, and it showed... I mean, for even an experienced player like myself, I saw, oh, okay, there's actually some tech that they're using there. So it's like, all right, they did a mid-stance combo. They did whatever. I don't even remember the moves. Fill the void. I don't even know. But, you know, he did the move that causes the player character to move back. And then he did stance tech, pre-stance switch in low stance and go back to the target to go for a grapple. Like, I noticed that, but compare that to the fist showcase and it's just a world of difference. And so as a result of players just not necessarily being introduced to the various ways the split staff could be played, it got almost immediately dismissed beyond... I mean, split staff gets reduced to what? Dragon Dance. That's like the most common thing I've heard. Dragon Dance, and then occasionally Shin Crusher. But even then, I don't hear nearly as much Shin Crusher as I do about Dragon Dance. And then for the longest time, at least until patch point 1.21, it was changing ways spam. Like it just got reduced to a one skill weapon. And whenever I've played the split staff, I've really enjoyed it because I've been able to tap in more so into its potential as just like this crazy speedy pressure machine that has it's a crazy weapon. And that's why it's one of my favorites. I love the Switchglaive. I love a lot of the weapons, but split staff and sword presently has pretty much just been my go-to weapon pair for like any situation. But it's just that matter of showing players here's a possibility, and I think the Fists showcase demonstrated that really well. And I hope that in line with what you're saying, they can continue to really showcase amazing gameplay elements. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Nioh gets pretty much swept under the rug, is just because players aren't just aware of what's possible in this game. The biggest focus, at least in the Western audiences, I can't say so much for Eastern audiences, but Western audiences tend to view this game as purely Souls-like. And the game director himself has stated that this is first and foremost an action game, which, I mean, it is, but all the build elements, all the so-called Souls-like elements they're just kind of peppered in because they're popular elements. This game is first and foremost an action game, but many players are not going to see it that way. They're going to see Souls-like because of things like the equivalent of a stamina bar, a health bar, parries, so on and so forth. Just the things that I've talked about many, many, many times.
Yes. Yeah, Nioh came at like a really bad time because that was when the Souls-like craze was starting to like come up. Code Vein, that 2014 Souls-like game, I completely forgot about it. Just so many games starting to take up the Souls-like mantle. Like Nioh came up a really bad time for that. And I remember the first Nioh Alpha. It was being marketed. It was being shown around on YouTube by a lot of Souls personalities, and I know this because I was a Souls player myself. Right, so Team Ninja unfortunately dug that hole for themselves, and I don't think it's gonna change anytime soon because that's how they started out. That's the first foot forward they put out, Souls. So that's how they're going to be seen for a long time, unfortunately.
Right, and I think again the bigger part of that. So I'm just gonna be frank here. I enjoyed Bloodborne, but I can't play Bloodborne again. Like I just can't. Like I've done the Chalice dungeons. I haven't done every conceivable thing in it. But I don't really have much interest because once I pretty much got a good understanding or a decent enough understanding for myself about the lore and the world building and whatnot, like it's cool, but I'm not going to like replay the game like 50 different times to get every single conceivable thing because I'm not as interested in the gameplay as I am with Nioh. Nioh is kind of the other way around. I don't really give a shit about the story. It's kind of there. It exists. It's not the most memorable. It's like, cool. They got some historical stuff with it, but pretty much just like fantasy based after a certain point. But the gameplay, I can just deep dive into it forever. And that's what's kept me going. I just think that the first impression, as you were saying, when it comes to Nioh, it just really missed the mark. As you were saying, Souls, anything from FromSoft was just simply recognized. It was just recognized really well. They marketed their game really well. I can't speak to their marketing at all, but what I can say is that it bottom line became well known. It became popular, and so it developed a reputation, whereas Nioh did not. The gold standard, so to speak, was a FromSoft title. Games like Bloodborne, which are awesome, but they get compared to that because that was the gold standard. Nioh was unable to really forge an identity of its own, at least in the public sphere. In my opinion, Nioh is very, very unique from most of these Soul games. I think it's different from all the FromSoft titles, and it has its own unique identity, but it just was not presented in the way that would really showcase that. I think players like XLH Gladiator did a great job. I think players like Fear Dude and all the OG players that really tapped into those cool technical ways of gameplay, I think they did a good job of showcasing it. But bottom line, the company should have done that. They should have showcased it, like you're saying, in the same way with Ninja Gaiden, where they had some elongated gameplay things.
Yes.
So that people have that in their head, and then they think of the game in that way. They should have done more things as they demonstrated with the claws, where you have crazy claws gameplay. They should have just really highlighted that to show this is what makes Nioh unique. This is not a carbon copy of Bloodborne. It's not a carbon copy of Dark Souls. Just because it has similar elements doesn't make it the same. So I think that would have really helped generate a lot of sales, a lot of interest, a lot of growth, continued support from the community at large in order for this game to thrive. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm really happy that they've sold over 1 million copies, but I can't help but think they could have sold, many, many more if they had just been able to market themselves as a unique product, because it is. I really feel Nioh is underappreciated and just doesn't get treated as well as it should.
It's about how you condition players to play the game. Because if you just keep telling them souls, 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 they'll completely blind out of their vision any other options that would allow you to play the game in a different way. And that's what's so cool about XLH Gladiator is it's not just that the gameplay he's showing was sick at the time, it's that he conditioned you to open your eyes to all these other cool options that Nioh offers that Dark Souls doesn't offer, because they seem so similar on the surface, but the different mechanics that Nioh has, like the stamina system, really actually puts an emphasis on everything. Like in the Souls games, to be honest, maybe I played them too much, but I think the stamina mechanics were superfluous at best, because it just was a way of not allowing you to spam an attack for 500 seconds. It's like, oh, you can't attack now because otherwise that would trivialize the game. So that was its only purpose. But now there's like an actual risk and reward to the key system. Like if you hit someone with very little key, that sets you up for a lot of combo opportunities, and it gives you a very big advantage. In any sort of game where there's combat, there's like an advantage and a disadvantage state. And I find really interesting how Nioh used the key system to dictate that if you're in low stamina, then you're in a disadvantaged state because combos are more easy to do because you're immobile for a certain amount of time and your actions are heavier on the stamina. But in the Souls, having no stamina just meant, oh, I have to walk from my opponent, and that's all there really is to it. There was very little depth to the combat.
It certainly does seem very turn-based, and Nioh in its own right has its own turn-based sort of feel from time to time. But I think, as you had mentioned, just the fact that Nioh's approach to stamina via the key ball system,
yes,
it's so unique in that it encourages you to keep pressure going.
But makes it deeper. That's what I really like.
Gameplay speed, at least even in just Nioh 1, was just off the charts. I mean, as you said, players like XLH and so on, it's remarkable how many crazy things that you could do. I mean, I know some players had demonstrated juggling, which did get patched out of the game, which I understand why people love juggling, but I think it's appropriate given the game vision.
Well, I think this can lead us to another very interesting and crucial topic, that it isn't just about how they remove juggling, but it is how TN likes to remove stuff that doesn't really harm the game, but doesn't bother to fit stuff that is fundamental to the game, like machine gun flux weapon switch 2, huh?
You're still hating on that, huh?
In all of this, you can call us like extremists, or we care way too much about these deep mechanics, but there was very little interaction between TN and their players. Like they just removed the juggling mechanic, even though many players were like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. They removed it, no word from them. It was like, a brick wall, like an omnipresent force that just removes everything you like. Oh, juggling, take it away. Key pulls, dodge, take it away. They later put it back in the final release, but that was because everyone was complaining about it. And Guardian Spirit cancel, take that shit out too. It's like, come on, Team Ninja, really? Just their whole philosophy of just fixing so much stuff that doesn't really matter, but then not telling us why they're fixing this stuff. It's like there's little communication. I don't understand Team Ninja at all. Like one of the main reasons why I'm not playing as much is because every time I read the patch notes, I start crying. Like a lot of times I'm reading the patch notes in my class and I'm like, oh no. I put the hands over my head and I'm like, why, Team Ninja? Why? It's like, it's so disheartening. It's like being in a relationship and the person is a jackass, but every day that they come through your door, you hope that they improve, but sometimes they don't do anything, and sometimes they just come back worse, or they come back drunk. That's kind of the analogy I can...
That escalated real quickly. So I think I can see your perspective. So here's my understanding of Team Ninja's approach to balancing. So truth be told, if there's one thing I completely agree with you upon, it's the lack of communication. So for example, if when they nerfed juggling, it would have been nice to have known why. Just a simple one paragraph blurb. I think the fact that it took effectively, 3+ years for a player like myself to really know the game vision of this game is a little disheartening. So I do appreciate the AMAs that the game director has been a part of, but by and large, I don't know about it. I really just don't know a lot about this game in general. There's so many things happening under the hood that are just really difficult to explain, really difficult to understand. And I think if we just had, as you say, more communication, it would address a lot of the concerns. I can understand why players dislike the fact that they removed juggling, but now that I have a better understanding of the game vision, I'm like, yeah, that would actually go against the vision of their game. The game director himself, he wants... His ideal combat is basically for the player and the opponent to be more or less on equal footing. and obviously we can discuss plenty of issues about that. I've got plenty of issues myself about that, especially with particular enemies. But by and large, when I approach the game, I do feel that they've overall remained quite faithful to that end. So whenever I typically fight an opponent, even with the knowledge that I have, the practice that I've had, so on and so forth, I generally do feel that most, if not all, enemies are pretty engaging in that respect. It's not just I can completely slaughter them, with the exception of the few enemies, but that's okay. And it usually feels like I'm on equal footing, so it delivers a different sense of engagement than, say, games like Devil May Cry, which are very much focused on the player being able to do like the craziest possible conceivable combos just all the time. And DMC also sometimes has been, I guess, derided as just being a punching bag simulator or a sandbag simulator, whatever. But again, it's just a different game vision. Now, what was I going to say? But certain enemies in Nioh, they are really frustrating, and I guess now I remember my point. I think the fact that it just took me this long to really understand that is kind of a failure on the game company's part. I really do wish that they had told us, hey, the reason why we're getting rid of juggling is because the opponents can't do anything whatsoever. The reason why we're nerfing said skill is because it's too powerful and this is what it was intended to do, or something like that. But we have basically nothing. It is all pretty much just assumptions that the player base has had. It's also just been players trying to read in between the lines. Like, I love this game, but I think the two biggest mistakes on their part, the games company's part, has just been not marketing really anything and lack of communication. If they just addressed those two, I'm almost certain this game would sell a lot more. If we knew, hey, okay, so Changing Ways was nerfed because it did too much damage, as opposed to reduce the damage of Changing Ways. Like, it's a difference. Yeah. There's a difference in how those are presented. Just telling us, hey, we're nerfing this ability. It's like, wait, what? You nerfed my ability? What the hell, man?
Right. It makes them like a villain.
Right? Yeah, like if you had a build, I guess, that revolved around the skill, which I wouldn't advise anyway. Yeah. But if you had a build, or you really just focused on this one skill, let's say you put it on all three of your stances, had like some build based upon it. All right, and then it got nerfed, and you weren't really told why, you'd get annoyed. Like, I knew with my experience that, hey, this ability, Changing Ways, does insane amounts of damage. Like, it's ridiculously powerful. Like, there's no other skill that does as much damage as it does. So I was like, yeah, it definitely needs a nerf and definitely warrants it. But again, to a casual player, someone who's just chilling, they're not going to notice the same things that I am. And I don't think it is reasonable for players to have as much knowledge as I do, and I'm not even a developer, I'm just like a player. I don't think there should be the expectation someone should have to be able to read in between the lines as much as I do. And just, they don't get the understanding, and they're not told why, so it's just a frustrating experience. So I totally get that, but so that's where I feel for you on that. But however, now that I understand the game vision, I can say that a lot of the nerfs that they've made are pretty much made for the following reasons. One, either they're overperforming to a serious degree, or something is really game breaking about it. I mean, those are kind of similar. Or usually there's a bug associated with it. And more often than not, a lot of the tech, so to speak, that we felt has been patched over, I guess, 20 different patches, whatever. A lot of the tech that has evaporated is simply because it was attached to a bug. The director himself said, we like having tech. If it doesn't break the game, we don't care. We keep it in. So that's why things like item cancels are never going to get patched. There's no bug attached to them, and there's no reason for them to really change it. So it doesn't destroy or really break the game in a manner that they feel is, I guess, as cheap as, say, Changing Ways spam. So being able to do items cancels requires some sort of skill, some sort of planning. There is some technical expertise revolving around it, whereas, say, spamming one skill requires, like, no effort. It's just like, all right, just push the same button. So I get that. Things like what we called Ultimate Raijin got patched because there was a bug in which you would attempt to do Raijin, and then what would happen is the skill wouldn't go off, but you lose most of your ki. Things like the Kusa Mad Spinner tech, it got quote-unquote patched because what happened was if you swapped certain weapons from the Kusarigama, you would incur a bug that would perform the Yamato no Orochi kill and just disrupt all gameplay for everybody else. So it was very frustrating to deal with. Now, oddly enough, they added skills for the axe, they added skills for the Kusarigama, which I guess we have dubbed Mad Spinner Tech Light. So that's been interesting at the very least. So I think I generally do agree with the nerfs they have made, but I do feel they need to do a better job about communicating their intents, their vision, because it should not take someone like me to go through like super secret channels or whatever to figure this out. It should be a lot more public. It should be a lot more visible to us. Rant over.
It's just, yeah.
Go ahead.
It's just that it annoys me because, you know, you can say, oh, we removed the Mad Spinner stuff, the Ultimate Riding, because they broke the game. And I would argue that, I mean, obviously they caused inconveniences in the game, quote unquote, but they didn't really break the game. But what it really saddens me about it is that it's something that the players brought onto the game themselves, right? Because the Ultimate Raiden thing, you know, it's something that players that they discovered themselves, and it's something that they wanted to add into the game because, you know, they've been practicing it so much. Like, I remember when White Goat discovered this, I was seeing his streams, like all he was doing for like an entire stream was just practicing Ultimate Raiden. And it's just one of those really cool accidental things that if I, as a developer, saw that, I'm like, okay, that's incredibly cool. Like they're so passionate about adding tech to the game that they're like actually trying to practice a glitch to do it consistently. And okay, maybe it doesn't work the way I intended, but it feels a bit disrespectful to the players because, our vision trumps whatever you guys do. But at the same time, it's like, they add insult to injury because Machine Gun Flood's 2 weapon switch, there's still an issue with that and they haven't fixed it and it's been there for 3 years or so. Or how about the whole triangle skills cause input issues? Or how after a yokai skill, you can't do certain guard plus square or triangle actions, but with some other weapons you can do them, or the Kusarigama diagonal dodge not working correctly, or how a hatchet auto fits you to a high stance once you do a high stance running attack. It's just, I feel like their priorities are messed up. That's why it frustrates me so much and why I was so vocal about it, because, you know, if you think about it, it's just, okay, it may break the game, but it's something that the players discovered, and maybe you shouldn't really take it away.
I can see that. I think the one thing I will say to their credit is that this year, 2020, has been extremely unique for many of us. I think the pandemic really put a wrench in all sorts of plans. Japan, the Team Ninja Studios had to shut down for a while. And so I know that they had to have been playing catch up. So they probably prioritized things like, you know, whatever DLC content that they had over, say, things as you were describing. Now, when it comes to tech, it doesn't seem like they balance around that whatsoever. If it happens to be in the game, great. But for the most part, they don't really balance around it. They have their intended systems and work from there. And then if tech evolves around that or from that and it happens to not conflict, then they'll keep it. But one thing I will say is I've spoken to the community manager, Master, and has mentioned to me that, mentioned to our Discord, that they are actually going to try to do a balance patch. I think it might be coming out, I think January 1st. I don't know when this podcast will be made public, but they're coming out with another balance patch that is going to aim to help address the balance issues that we perceive. So I know the Discord has come up with not so much suggestions because they're not going to really make any new content, unfortunately, as far as we know. But they are looking for balance tweaks. So the priority subjects that Grey Dawn has come up with have been things like input drops, which is something that's been huge for me. Tracking issues. So they recently improved the high stance ability for dual sword spinning dragon. Before, its tracking was pretty crappy, but then they dramatically improved it. I'm like, wow, this is great. Can we have this type of treatment to all sorts of many abilities? And so they did that with abilities like Kusarigamas, I believe, whirlwind kick, because that usually would just miss many, many times, even though you'd think you're pretty close to facing your target. So things like tracking, input drops, I forget what else we had, but I know one other thing, one general frustration from the community has been, hey, RNG is still way too high. Like, what's the point of the lucky drop grace mechanics for the scrolls? Why do those drop after I've gone through the entirety of the underworld? And after reading comments from last podcast, I kind of realized that I didn't explain myself as well. And so I did get to read some of them and see that, hey, yeah, there's naturally some legitimacy. This is a single player game, and do I really want to spend hundreds of hours or even close to that department to get out, I guess, a fully decked out character? Even in games like MMOs, any of the MMORPG games that still exist, I don't know if you have to spend as much time to get the gear that you want. I mean, there's a difference between, say, like getting, I don't know, like a set bonus or maybe 3 extra points on a stat for absolute perfect rolls. And yeah, that can take forever. But versus, say, getting things as simple as, hey, I'm just trying to get my set bonuses. Can I at least get that? So there is a difference, and I certainly feel that RNG could be remedied. And so that's one of the things that we're actually pushing for in our balance document. So I would say let's just see what's in store. There still will be some support for the game, and we can just hope that a lot of the balance considerations get addressed. I do hope that there's consistency. There's a lot of inconsistencies in Nioh, and I can understand it can be very, very difficult to point those out or notice them, let alone address them in a way that doesn't completely break the game. But we'll just have to see. That's all I can say about that.
It's just, I say all this kind of stuff because, I really try to think in the future, will people remember Nioh 2 in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Will they?
And probably not.
Probably
if I'm
not.
To be honest.
Yeah, probably not. But at least for the people that do care about the game, what's stopping them from just, not getting frustrated and just moving on to another game? Because that's happened to me so many times, and that's why it just sometimes feels like Team Ninja doesn't put enough care into the polish of their game, because sometimes their action, they say they prioritize the action of their game quite heavily, but sometimes I feel like they haven't really polished enough the controls of the game or the mechanics of the game. It feels like an afterthought sometimes, and that's why it pains me so much to see the certain actions that they take. It just feels like it makes things worse.
I can see that. It makes, I think a lot of our concerns about the game would, again, just be remedied if we had some more, I guess, communication from them. AMAs are nice, but it'd be nice if the game company really did their own campaign. One thing that actually kind of depressed me is that if you look on Team Ninja's official YouTube, they have no traction. Team Ninja Studios' actual YouTube has no traction. They put a DLC trailer there, it has no views compared. My videos have more views than this. I'm like, dude, how am I in the same league as an entire game company? So it kind of just saddens me that they have no traction. And I really think that it is their responsibility first and foremost to come out with that. And I'm not trying to denigrate the company whatsoever. That's not my intent. I certainly want them to succeed. Their products are amazing. I'm a big fan of Ninja Gaiden, big fan of Nioh and Nioh 2. So if they ever do come out with the Ninja Gaiden remaster, you can bet I'm going to play it and stream it and just enjoy it, even despite all the frustrations I had with it. It's a very memorable game to me. Nioh and Nioh 2 have been very memorable for me to play. But I certainly enjoy their products. But I feel like they could do more easily. It's not a matter of they have to overhaul anything crazy. It's just just do a little bit. So like you said, just have some explanations, have some communication. Why they did this? Why they did that? Here's what we're going for. Just something simple. It doesn't have to be complex, as opposed to nerf. They get called Team Nerf for that reason. Mm-hmm. Just being in the know, knowing about this makes such a big difference to players. And it doesn't nearly, it cushions whatever blow we might get from a nerf. That's pretty much what I can say about that. I'm a broken record at this point in that regard. But I guess let's shift to current issues you feel are in the game. Let's talk about what specific changes you would like to see.
Machine gun floods to weapon switch glitch.
So what do you, for any of our listeners or viewers and whatnot, what do you mean exactly by that? Could you clarify?
Yeah, sure. So you guys may not be aware of this glitch. Actually, let's just not call it the machine gun floods to weapon switch glitch. It's actually more like a timely guard weapon switch glitch. So
it's basically super tech.
Huh?
It's basically super tech.
Well, no, I'm actually going to disagree with you there pretty hard.
Go for it.
Because the thing is, it affects machine gun floods to weapon switching, but it also just affects switching your weapon normally. Guarding and switching your weapon, this glitch can cause you to not be able to do that. And that's something very simple, like, oh, I want to switch to dual swords because I know I do way better with them against Onryoki, but I want to be guarding because I want to be safe. But then, hold up, that doesn't work. The thing is, if you have a timely guard skill for the sword, the odachi, the kusa, the hatchets, you won't be able to switch your weapon for the time period that the timely guard would register. So we're talking about half a second, more or less, so which makes the game feel extremely unresponsive. Like you try to switch the weapon while guarding, but it doesn't work. And this isn't even just super technical stuff. This is just common courtesy at this point, like being able to switch weapons while guarding. Come on, it feels so basic, and this is why I say, oh, the game feel like it lacks polish. Well, it's certain stuff like this that I wouldn't expect to see in any other action game that values their combat so much, but they still haven't patched it, and it's been in Nioh since the very beginning. It's been there, since the beginning. I'm pretty sure Arok discovered this, and I was playing through Nioh 1, replaying through it around 2020, and that's when I was equipping and de-equipping the timely guard skills, and I realized, hold up, it's the timely guard skills that are causing this issue. But it's insane how Team Ninja did not notice this, because it feels like such an obvious thing for a playtester to do, because playtesters, we may not realize, but they do tons of crazy stuff to exploit a game and to find a glitch with it. So switching weapons while guarding is such a basic thing, but they still have not done it. And I sent them a document with it like a month ago saying, hold up, this is like a huge issue. And they even responded to me, like it was in the tweet, right? And it was like a document with a bunch of issues. I'll link it in the comment section when this video goes up. But essentially, I tweeted at them, like, these are a bunch of issues. And within them, there was the timely guard glitch, and they're like, oh, thank you for sending these issues to us, we'll look into them, and they haven't fixed a single one that I put in them. Another glitch that I can think of is, Undaunting?
Yeah, what about it?
So this is pretty specific, but if I'm not mistaken, Undaunting is the one where you stab your odachi into the ground, right?
Yeah.
So if your enemy, this is so stupid, but if you're using a purity weapon, right, the ones that have key pulls on block, if your enemy bounces off the weapon, you will not get a key pulse. But if they don't, like they have parry disable or they're a yokai, you will be able to get that key pulse. And I'm like, but why? It's like such a basic thing to test it out, but it doesn't work the way it should. I can actually pull up the document.
Oh, no, I believe you on that regard. I mean, I personally find Undaunted to be a pretty underwhelming ability. I haven't really found any neat use for it. I actually replaced it as soon as I could with Thunderbolt. But, I mean...
I'm pretty sure that you can use it against Obsidian Samurai. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll test this after the podcast. But you know how Obsidian Samurai goes into hyper armor mode halfway through the fight?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it works like the Tonfa timely guard, that if you hit him while he's in the recovery of being timely guarded, he will take hit stun again. So it has its uses. And I'm pretty sure the lag between using Undaunted and using an attack is actually not that bad. So it isn't a horrible attack, but not being able to do key pulls of the opponents that get hit stun, which are the ones that you will be using Undaunted for, feels like a missed opportunity, because okay, what it's really good for is not reducing key, but being able to make opponents like bounce off their weapons. And if you're not able to get a key pulse off that, then it feels pretty bad. That's why it like kind of annoys me. If it was the other way around, I probably would not care.
I can completely see that. I mean, I think the only thing I can say to credit the dev team is that with all the various different dimensions of gameplay available, it's probably really difficult for them to keep track of everything. Now, of course, when players submit feedback, it would be nice to have that heard and listened to and addressed, but again, I really don't know the inner workings whatsoever of their team, and so I can't really comment on that. I imagine they have their hands full based on what I know about Japanese work ethic and culture, which is pretty much overworking yourself to the bone. I don't know how big their team is. I don't know if they have a big team, a small team. I really don't know. I'm still surprised, again, that they don't really have a dedicated marketing department, so to speak. I mean, they do some, but in terms of, I guess, compared to other companies, it's pretty much non-existent. So I don't really know the inner workings of their companies. I can't say exactly why they haven't addressed certain things. At this point, it's just mere speculation, but I imagine that the issues that may plague, say, you or I probably don't plague literally anybody else. Most players, I think, are frustrated with gear RNG far, far more than they are about, say, an interaction between, say, an Odachi skill not working with an element. Just not saying I disagree with your assertion. I certainly think that, hey, it's a blocking type skill. Shouldn't I get the purity benefits from it? I mean, that makes sense. So again, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. And right, so I think players are going to care more about gear RNG versus, say, you know, the exact interactions between, say, one skill and an element. Or even a player such as myself, if I had to pick between, say, one skill getting perfectly, I guess, adjusted versus, say, hey, make the hidden skill farming almost non-existent, or just like remove it altogether, or simplify the process, or add a pity timer, I'm going to be like, well, I want to be able to play more of the game than I'm going to worry about one skill working perfectly in every single way, shape, or form. So I think that's kind of the standpoint from the developers as well, is just to go with high priority issues. Now, again, there is still going to be support for this game. It's not like, hey, patch 1.21 was going to be the last thing. The community manager master communicated this to the Discord, and so that's why we've been working on that balance documents to address things like you're saying, hey, skills like this need to be addressed. And again, there's only certain things that they're going to be able to do, I'm sure, in terms of their budget. I'm pretty confident that if they had the resources and the support that I think they deserve, that they'd be able to do a lot more of these fine-tuned things that I think would really help extend the game life and interest. But again, we'll have to see. This isn't, as much as I love and care about this game, it's really out of my jurisdiction. It's really not within my control. And, you know, I can just wish for the best. But yeah, you wanted to say?
Well, the reason why I even talk about this is going back to the whole thing of remembering the game in a few years, right? Obviously, all the mainstream attention will just like die. You know, who cares? Okay, they're gone. But then for the people who really care about this game, you know, once they're playing through the game for nostalgia, for vintage's sake, right? They want to go in looking for the best experience, because why else would you go looking for old games if, you know, they're not top or peak quality? And just seeing little stuff like that, like the weapons not working properly, just even though it's just small stuff, it really makes you feel like, this game isn't as professional as it should be. And even though in the short term, as you say, I would definitely love not having to grind boss skills. Like, I would pay an arm for and a leg if to be able to do that. You know, in the long run, people won't care about it because they'll just farm, right? Because if they're really interested into the game, like 10 years into the future, you know, I know there's a lot of grinding, but I have to do it because, you know, I really want to get into this deep combat system. But it'll be more disappointing if they see that it lacks polish. But that's a small point. I actually want to transition into something else completely. And it's how the root source of all these issues. And it's just the loot and the RPG and how they mixed it with the action. And I feel like it was a very stupid, I'll be blunt, it's a stupid decision from Team Ninja to add so many RPG elements. And I know your take. Well, I assume I know your take, Poofy, because I see you. I heard you say this in almost every podcast. Like I'm gonna try to imitate you, like in a respectful way.
Go
right?
for it, please. You can't hurt me any more than what you did at the beginning of the podcast. So go on.
Oh, come on! It makes you more likable, if you're getting trash talk.
Does it?
But
yeah, go ahead.
What was the thing? Oh yeah, your take, from what I understand, is I really think that the whole RPG system is a boon to the game because I'm allowed to play with low-level weapons and being able to use my technical skill, while other players that may need higher numbers will be able to play their own way, and everyone's happy. That's your take, right?
That's pretty much my take. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the surface level, that sounds pretty great. Like, hold up, we got two different groups of people, the scrubs and the non-scrubs. Just kidding. But, we got two different groups of people, and that's great. And we have more audience, and that's what you're always talking about. But I honestly just really disagree with it because, first of all, you talk about TN having limited resources because even though they're kind of like releasing in their game in a AAA sphere, I mean, I don't know if you would call Nioh AAA, but it's pretty close, I would say, personally. But, I'm sure their budget is kind of like limited. So them having to include an extra mechanic, with the whole number system, because we know that they say, oh, the action is the main element of our game. But then they actually just make themselves work extra hard with all these RPG elements, with all these loot elements. For what? To be able to appease more players, quote unquote. But at the same time, it is these same elements of the loot and the RPG systems and the numbers. They bring inequalities to the game. Like, the game isn't perfectly balanced anymore. In Ninja Gaiden, all the numbers are perfectly balanced for you to have the intended experience. But now it really isn't. And even though you have more choice, player choice isn't always a good thing because game designer is able to make out a better experience than an actual player. Like, I really like how players try to challenge themselves in games to try to make a better experience for themselves. But in the end, a game designer that is paid and works like more than 8 hours a day to do this kind of stuff probably has a better idea. So in that sense, the RPG system is just kind of throwing everything in the loop. In the other way, it just makes them have to work even harder. And thirdly, it just makes them turn off away a huge part of their audience. Matthew Matos is a very popular YouTube game critic. He's very much into these action kind of games. He's done 2-hour commentaries on Devil May Cry and Beautiful Yo. Do you know those games?
Yeah, I do.
Right. So, he's pretty nutty to do such in-depth analysis of this game. So you'll be like, oh, Nioh, he's looking for another action game. I'm sure he'll love Nioh, especially because one of his hot takes was, I love the Soul series, but I wish it had better combat. So it's like, Nioh, it's just Souls, but with better combat. Just go to that game, right? But I remember in one of his streams so vividly that he's like, you know what? I really don't want to play Nioh 2. You have to manage all that loot. I just want to pick up the controller and play. And just constantly ask myself, and I know that no matter what I say, you have your own opinion, and I respect what you say because the whole thing of adding loot to increase the playability of your game is a very good concept and a very interesting goal to achieve for. But even then, I just think that it's just a killing blow to themselves. Like, Team Ninja's adding more work, and it really doesn't pay benefit to them.
I can see your perspective. Now, I certainly think that there are certain things that, oh man, this is going to get really complex real fast. Now, personally, as a player, I really don't care much for the loot system, the RPG mechanics. Like, great, there's stuff, and I would of course prefer it to be more like the action type games that I've enjoyed, which was pretty much just simple. I want to pick up, play the controller, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, there's obviously this whole thing with, hey, you got to manage your inventory, and that's going to take like 30 minutes of time at least a day or whatever. Or got to manage my thousands of items in the storehouse, right?
Yes.
Now, again, I think the bigger issue here is just a matter of how Nioh is presented. And this is something I've also been very vocal about. Things like the new player experience are really rough. They recently changed it so that new players can now have like a training mode, sort of, or basically access to the dojos at all times on their first playthrough, which I think needed to have been done from the get-go. That's like something that should have been done immediately, so that's something they missed their mark on. But the biggest criticisms I've had in regards to this game for new players is just been, hey, dojos are like out of place entirely. The ability to actually learn any meaningful game mechanics is greatly overshadowed by this idea of loot management and build making, at least in the Western audience. That is what Nioh is known for, and it gets really frustrating. And then you have gear RNG, and so what happens is that your perspective gets skewed. And when you have that skewed perspective and that permeates to many, many different people, then the game is just seen as just a certain way. So I think when you get to Matthew Mitosis, that may have preceded before he decided, hey, I'm not going to bother with this game because I don't want to deal with loot simulator. No one wants to manage like things like that to such extreme. And it's nice that you can decide what loot you want to pick, but it's just there's so much to work through. So I get that frustration. Yes. And again, like I think a lot of this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I think I didn't let you finish.
I was just gonna say it. It's nice that I have the loot filters. I'm like, okay, I'm only gonna pick up this rarity because I literally don't care about anything else. It's nice to have that, but again, these are like things that they don't really address the core of the problem in my mind. I think again, the biggest, if nothing else changed about the game, I think if just its reputation, its perception, if that was able to change, Nioh would sell a lot more. I certainly think it could attract a lot of members from the technical fighting game communities that love all their crazy button inputs and combos. I certainly think there's a lot of potential for DMC players to really enjoy Nioh. But again, it gets dismissed as a Souls-like. It gets seen a certain way. And then when you have a bunch of obtuse systems in the way and a lot of confusing things and you have no real direction, you're like, I literally don't know what to do. Let me go see what other people are doing on YouTube and what's popular, and then they see it this way and now I see it this way too. And then that's really been the big problem. Like I said before, the fact that Team Ninja's YouTube channel has like very little traction is telling. The fact that the best forms of communication are, hey, Team Ninja's Twitter, and for the longest time it's like, hey, here's a GIF, 7 days left till DLC, and it's like, okay, this generates zero hype for me. I was like,
you're not hyped for the GIFs?
I'm like,
I love the GIFs.
I'm like, are you kidding me? But again, I do think though, while I've been kind of criticizing them, I think we should give credit where credit's due. When they have demonstrated or shown the potential of their game, they've knocked it out of the park. So Claw's Showcase, easy example. Example. Everybody who watched that, who was a fan of Nioh, loved it. No matter who they were. They're like, man, this weapon looks so cool. There's this. Well, how does it do this? And this is from like, just any player who watched it was like, damn, that looks so cool. I know a lot of skill-based players are like, holy shit, look at this complex mechanic. Look at these cool skills. And, they were an exciting weapon. And I think that treatment just applied to all their various game mechanics. And then they say, hey, this game is first and foremost an action game, but look at all of these features that will help support it if you find the game is harder. If they had just presented the game that way, I think Nioh would have sold many, many more. It could easily have sold multiple millions of copies. I know Nioh 1 was successful, but Nioh 2's success could be a lot more. Even with, I know, the impending PC release, and I'm sure there'll be quite a few players who pick it up then and don't have to worry about all the patches and bug fixes and yada, yada, yada. Yes. But I think that if the game director's vision was the way that the game was presented to players, it would do a lot better. And I think a lot of our issues would just magically vanish. And I just hope that for future installments from the game company, for whatever they're going to make, do kind of take that lesson into their next title. I think that's, if nothing else, they don't even have to change how they approach games, even though I know that might be frustrating for some people to hear. But if they just marketed the game better and showcased what they intended for the game to be and explained certain changes, the game would do a lot better. If you guys didn't know, unfortunately, there won't be a Nioh 3. That doesn't surprise me at all based on how this game's going to be. I think they probably just want to move to a new title, mostly because they probably felt fairly restricted in regards to Nioh and Nioh 2. So who knows? But that doesn't surprise me at all. But yeah, so sad news, I guess, for many of you. I mean, it's not going to faze me at all. I'm going to be playing this for a while. But Yeah, how do you feel about that? What do you attribute the whole lack of a Nioh 3 going to be? Do you think it's going to be just because they consider Nioh 2 a failure, which it's not a failure, in my opinion, whatsoever?
Who knows? I don't think there's enough information to make a judgment yet.
That was a very balanced answer. Thank you for that. But
what, you're saying my answers were not balanced before?
No, man, they were imbalanced. They were changing ways patch 1.20 level unbalanced. I'm just joking around. But okay, what was I gonna say? What's something that I cut you off on? Because I know I cut you off on something.
Oh, cutting me off?
Yeah, I cut you off somewhere.
No, just like small little comments I wanted to add, like, oh yeah, this happened to me, or nah, don't worry, it was nothing important. I do want to respond again to what you're saying, maybe
sure.
we're sticking to this topic quite a lot, but you say that, the marketing, the reason why people are not going into this action kind of stuff is because, the marketing is poor, which we can agree on that. But I also just want to say that the problem is, I also still think that, having the loot is detrimental no matter how well Team Ninja tries to market their games. Because while I see your perspective, there's also just a big part of wanting to optimize games. So what I mean by optimize is like if you're a player, you want to get the most amount of reward for the least amount of skill. I guess you could say that, right? And it's not about playing with low skill options because, let's just use like abstract numbers. Like it's not about using option that has 40 points of reward because it only requires 10 points of skill. No, it's doing an option that gives you 200 points of reward but it only requires 30 points of skill. Like it requires less points of skill per reward, right? So that's a very natural feeling in basically every game, racing, RPG, fighting, like whatever the hell you're playing. You want to optimize how you're playing the game. And the thing is, the loot actually just gives you the perfect option. The least amount of skill for the most amount of reward is basically the loot. But that means that players are not playing the skilled way, right? And the thing is, there's going to be optimization in a skill-based game because, okay, I know that I really have to practice this kind of like technique, but I know it'll give me lots of reward. But why do that when the loot itself provides a much better alternative? The thing is, it's just a very weird rule we've placed upon the skill community that we're not going to abuse builds, we're not going to abuse weapons because it's such counterintuitive logic because people, it's kind of like the melee community in a way, like they've made these really weird rules for themselves because they know playing the game that way is much funner, but it's so unintuitive, and that's why so many people can't get into competitive melee because why turn off your items? Because turning off items would mean that you don't have as many optimized strategies, but people do it because we know it's fun to play melee without items. Well, same thing here. Why not just use powerful loot? It's just it feels a very unnatural system to have. Like, oh, don't use too much to loot; it's bad for you. It's like when you try to tell your kids that, oh, don't smoke, don't drink, but people like drinking. It's such a weird thing. I just don't like the loot mechanic because we're trying to get people to have fun the way we know they'll have the most amount of fun, but due to their optimization strategy, well, they'll always gravitate towards loot, and that's why loot is so bad. And this kind of brings me back to Doom Eternal. I haven't played Doom Eternal, but I've seen lots of interviews with Hugo Martin, who's the director, and he says, I know I want to make you play the game the way I want you to, and we're going to do whatever we can to make you play that way because we know that way is much better. So what do? They make that the optimization strategy is playing the game the way they want to. So they want you to switch weapons all the time. Okay, so my strategy is to shoot for the weak points and use weapon-specific strategies to kill enemies the fastest way possible. So, okay, that's actually making you play the game the way they want you to, but players are still optimizing their gameplay, so it doesn't feel unnatural. They're not restricting themselves in such a stupid way because, they have to find the funnest way to play the game. And that's what I really, really, really hate about the loot system because it's always telling me to not have fun. You want to optimize your experience? Well, you're not going to have fun because It's just everything's going to die in one hit. And that's the problem. The loot and the action system, they don't work together in a way that they should, because focusing more on the loot doesn't mean that you focus more on the combat. It's the other way around. The more you focus on combat, the less you focus on loot, and vice versa. And while I personally, if I was the director of Nioh 2, I would just completely remove loot from the game, right? If that was my decision, if they forced me, like they put a gun to my head, okay, you need to put loot into this game somehow. Well, I would certainly make it so that the margin of variability is much lower. I remember XLH Gladiator made this very interesting comment that he didn't really like so much the challenge of Nioh compared to DMC3, because in DMC3, everyone had equal footing. Like, obviously, people would have different weapons, could have different health, but overall, the variability was very, very low. So it made it feel like a whole community trying to beat DMC3 in Dante Masai. But here, there's so much variability, it doesn't really feel as cool. It doesn't feel like there's a huge family in the community, because everyone is just so different from each other. Like, the loot doesn't complement the action, and that's why I hate it. Remove the loot from the game.
Excuse me. I see your point. So, one thing that you said kind of spoke out to me. Players who generally focus on skill play don't care nearly as much about loot as those who, naturally, if you're going to build a crazy character, you're going to focus almost entirely on the loot system and not care about the technical aspects of the gameplay. So when you say, hey, delete all loot, I see where that's coming from. At least in the Western audiences, technical gameplay is just something that's glossed over. So irrespective of, me talking about all the marketing and whatnot, that's just kind of how it is. It's like technical gameplay, it's like really hard to find for Nioh. Most of the time I get newer viewers on Twitch and whatnot. They're like, whoa, I didn't know you could play this game this way. Hell, I was even the same way the first time.
We're all the same.
Remember, and most of us, if not all of us, who played Nioh 2 Nioh 2 had the exact same experiences, which is where we saw it this way. And then when someone shook that idea up and they're like, whoa, exposed to a whole new way of playing. And then just kind of hope that experience would have been a bit different from the get-go. I would have been encouraged to try a bit more of technical play from the beginning. That would have been much more entertaining than say, all right, I'm just going to build up a flowing shadow build and spam that for days and just clear everything, which was cool and fun in its own way. But that gameplay experience, at least for me, is very limited. So I do think that the loot does do a disservice in that respect, but unfortunately, that's not something that's going to change. But I think for future installments of whatever, or future IPs, I think that's a lesson that they could take, is just that they don't need to go as loot heavy, that they should promote and should encourage the player to try more technical side things. That's something I personally want, but It seems that the decision making for that may have been a decision that came up from the higher ups, people who said, hey, these are the things that we want this to be put in for sure. And if it's your job, and it's like, well, I kind of got to do that because it's my job. I'm told to by my boss.
That's the communication. Had they told us, it was a desire from Team Ninja, they could have even put it like in a nice way. Oh, the high-ups in Team Ninja wanted us to experiment with loot gameplay. Like, they could have just said that in a very nice PC kind of way. And it's like, oh, okay. And if they had said that, I think I'd be much more accepting. But for all I know, it could have just been the director's choice. And if it was the director's choice, I have no idea why he did it. And therefore, that makes me way madder at him. So, as we were talking before, this whole communication thing just comes back to so many other aspects of the game. It's not just that, oh, we're whiny crying babies. It's just that any problem with the game that we have, like this one right now, it gets exacerbated because we have no idea what they're actually thinking. But yeah, continue.
Right. If we knew what they were thinking, a lot of these issues wouldn't be a concern whatsoever.
Yeah, it'd be like, oh, okay. And they gave us like a good way to approach the game too, like realistic.
The one thing I will say about the build work and build making, at least, is that surprisingly, build work has gotten more interesting with each progressive New Game Plus cycle. So I didn't actually think it would become as interesting as it has been this time. As you know, I'm a technical based player. And so when I've seen like the latest information drops about, hey, these are the new graces and here's what they do. And hey, look how they've upgraded past sets and whatnot. And when I've seen how they've adjusted them, like, this actually makes each of these things quite tempting. Like, I've talked about Marisi's Grace or Tsukiyomi's Grace, which provide things like empowered ninjutsu or empowered onmyo magic, in which basically you can refill your items at will just by using your items, your jutsu, and then just attacking and then getting it back. And I'm like, that's really cool. Like, I can... And I remember thinking about, like, hey, maybe I could make like this cool Ninja Gaiden build. And then, of course, they added Dragon Ninja Plus, which gives you empowered ninjutsu at a B+ rank. So you effectively can just go full Dragon Ninja and like play it as if you were playing Ninja Gaiden. Like, you can throw out your Ninpo in the same vein. All right, Inferno, and then I attack a bunch, and then I get it back. Like, it's very cool how they did that. Or you have a lot of the newer graces. Let me see if I can show them off. I think I showed this off in the last podcast, but let's see what I got. So, some of the newer graces, what do we got? I think Take Minakata's is probably the most boring of the graces in terms of playstyle. It's just like generic, all-purpose. Like, here's damage taken, key recovery speed, melee attack, key consumption, melee damage, skill damage. That's like the least interesting. But then you have things like, let's see if I got one. I've talked about Ame no Uzume's before, which encourages a playstyle playing very evasively, especially with its 7-piece bonus of Death Dancer. Death Dancer, basically, don't take damage for a certain period of time. You get a stack of damage. And you lose stacks if you take hits or blocks. So you want to avoid basically everything. And it gives you a ton of damage if you can pull it off. So it's like, okay, you have an evasive playstyle that's encouraged. Let's see another one that I have. Hopefully one of the newer ones. Okay, Okinanushi's Grace. This one's really cool. So this one provides 2 different benefits. You've got Elemental Transmission, which... Let's say you quote your weapon with fire, you swap to your other weapon, well, now that weapon will also be quoted with fire, so it encourages weapon switching. And then to kind of round it all about, you've got basically, this is now the Flash Attack Grace, which, hey, you use flash attacks, then you reduce key consumption, and you get, just a bunch of benefits for doing this and swapping your weapons. I'm like, whoa, I swap my weapons all the time. This game now is encouraging me to do that and giving me benefits for it. And look at all the support that it's giving.
It'd be cool if they fix machine gun fletch to weapon switch.
Well, I think the reason... Go ahead.
No. It's just that you're talking about encouraging weapon switching. It's just, I have to mention it again because I'm never satisfied. I have to mention it every single day of my life that machine gun fletch to weapon switch needs to be fixed.
Put that on your tombstone too, right?
Yes. Team Ninja, I know you're probably disbanded by the time I'm dead, but please fix machine gun fletch to weapon switch.
Okay, it'll come out with a Ninja Gaiden 20, which will never happen. So there's that. I think the reason for that specific interaction is because... question, does that apply only in mid-stance, or is it every stance no matter what?
Mid-stance. Oh, yeah, and it applies to your precious split stuff, too.
Oh, does it? So I think the reason for that is because the game is trying to trigger the skill, as you said, the Timely Guard. And so Timely Guard occurs before the block.
Yes.
Technically, in terms of animation. So when you turn it off, then you can do it without any trouble. But I don't know how they would address
I was
that.
so excited with 1.21 patch because they talked about Moonlit Snow Redux. I think that's the name of the move. There's no more an issue with it with Timely Guards. And I'm like, hold up, maybe they fixed the root issue of all of this. And I just quickly excited, boot up Nioh 2, and then I realized it didn't fix it. And then I fell deep into depression.
Well, the issue was, at least in mid-stance, it was just this weird interaction. It was different from what you're talking about. But back to the point in terms of loot.
Sorry, I derailed.
No, it's okay. I totally get where you're coming from, though. Obviously, I would like things to be technically refined, things to be consistent, but all things considered, that's probably not going to happen given the scope of the things that they'd have to do and the budget that they'd have to allot for it. I want it. Don't get me wrong, I want it, but I don't think they're going to be able to do it. But we'll try. You never know. They improved Spinning Dragon's tracking for whatever reason and did the same for Whirlwind Kick. They could probably do the same thing to all sorts of other weapons so that they're in line with, say, the fists or the claws. Because fists and claws tracking is much perfect. I don't really know. I'm like, hey, this ability is going to miss. I think the only ability that's done that is Limitless when a target moves at the last second. But that kind of fine. It's such a minor problem. But back to the loot stuff. Loot is certainly overwhelming. Managing inventories is overwhelming. You can see I have a ton of ranged weapons, and I haven't like spent the time to go through this because I really don't want to. I just want to pick up and play, as you said, Matthew Mitosis did, and I completely get that. But I think to Team Ninja's credit, the loot stuff that they have added has encouraged more play styles. So now with things like Izanami Grace, which I think Bunny might call my dieback build now. But they've added a lot of support for things like, let's just show the living dead mechanic now. There's a lot of text, but basically, if you're about to die, you get a brief period in vulnerability. You kill a bunch of stuff. You can heal back to full by doing melee damage with enemy, but that's the only way you can heal. And then it's basically like a second life, so to speak. So that's like pretty cool that you have this, that you can heal back to full. And then, they've added a lot of support for things like, hey, Yokai Realm, you get life recovery. Anima Charge, you get like Dark Realm. Like there's just like a lot of anti-yokai sort of benefits to this grace. So it's an interesting option. And I think having more interesting options that are actually meaningful is certainly something that's great. God, I really want to show one of the newer graces. Here we go. Sarutahiko's grace. This one's really cool, and I'm actually making a build guide using someone else's footage in relation to this. But this entirely, Blood of the Yokai, which makes everything kind of come together for this, basically means you can just play in Yokai Shift like the whole damn time. The more anima you spend, you basically fill up your gauge. And from the footage that I will have out, hopefully later this week, you get to see,
Isn't that kind of boring, though?
Damn, there's a lot of supports. Yeah, but I'll show it in the video, but the amount of support that this grace alone provides for that is absolutely insane. The player who supplied me this footage, Immovable Wisdom, he just had it's the footage he provided. I was like, "Are you serious? This is ridiculous! Like this is insane." It was just.
I think you cut off.
Oh, I cut off. My bad. What I was saying is that the person who provided footage to me in regards to the build guide I'm working with showed me footage of just like all the crazy interactions that he did with Yokai Shift, and it was just off the charts. I'm like, I didn't actually think it'd be this ridiculous, but it is, and it was really cool to see. One also note, he spammed a lot of Epon, so extra bounty points for that. That's all you need to do. But bottom line, they've provided a lot of interesting ways for you to interact with the game. Do I think there's a problem with too much loot? Yes. But the loot that they do have, especially now with a lot of new graces getting just cool reworks, makes them, it intrigues me. I want to try many, many different things at the same time. And that's certainly going to be fairly time consuming, but really cool to try out. Like Izanagi's grace is now the new purification grace. So it works really powerful. And it's just like, hey, you get, you can apply purity really damn quickly, Shrek enemies who are purified. And then, hey, anytime you clear a yokai realm, you get a buff. And it's like really damn good because it like refreshes all the time. So you get health regen, you get key speed up, and you get more melee damage, like just in general. I'm like, that's pretty damn good. And they just keep doing things like this that are just interesting options to deal with your game. Hell, if I wanted to go key damage crazy, I've got Ninagi's Grace, which has just like a ton of key damage built into it. So there's many different ways. I know Tetsuo in the last podcast was working with that too. So it's just remarkable how many different choices you can mess around with that have meaningful changes to the game. That is one reason why I'm okay with how they've handled builds in general in this game now, because they're much more meaningful than just say, hey, this is a raw just damage boost, and that's all it is. The manner in which they have approached loot at least is more interesting. Do I think there could be improvements? Absolutely. There could be in so many respects, but by and large, this has been an improved and a significantly more enjoyable product than Nioh 1 was. What do you think?
I don't use loot. I think it's boring, so I guess it sounds cool. To be fair, I've been listening intently to what you've been saying, right? You've been describing all of this loot stuff, but I don't know. It just feels like the kind of decisions that maybe it's a rough interpretation, and maybe because I don't use loot that much, you can say that it's inaccurate. But I still want to say this. It's just it feels like one of those decisions that it looks really important, but when it actually plays out, it really isn't that important. Like, okay, you talk about all of these damage boosts and like all these different scenarios where you can incur them. Like, which one? That dancer, you said that when you don't get hit, you get a damage increase, right? I'm not mistaken on that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. Okay, so that seems really important, right? Like you're making a build and you're deciding upon all of these things, right? Like you have all your loot and you see that you can make certain builds, right? Because you've grinded so much, and maybe you spend 30 minutes doing that, and it's like, okay, I feel really confident about this because I feel like it really suits my playstyle. But then I just feel like, okay, it's just maybe it looks like it makes a difference, but it doesn't actually make a difference. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing more damage, or maybe that makes the fight go quicker, or it allows you to use more moves that you like than with a normal build, and that's all cool. But in the grand scheme of things, for me, I don't see like it makes a big difference. Like maybe it just funnels you into a certain play style, but at the same time not really affecting the game that much, and that's why. Another thing that I really don't like it's a microcosm of YouTube picking up two swords. I mean, like, well, I think this sword makes a more impactful decision. But if you were to use any of the other two swords, or like someone swapped it out with the one you didn't like, you probably wouldn't notice. I don't know, because I'm just.
Well, I see what you mean.
Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way,
Sure.
because I rambled on a bit because I wasn't really sure how to phrase this. Imagine I was making X build and you swapped it out with Y build. I wouldn't even notice, honestly.
I'm going to disagree with that, at least in Nioh 2. In Nioh 1, whatever. Nioh 1 was not nearly as refined. With Nioh 2, at least now, especially more than before, there is a meaningful difference between what sets you use and what graces you use. It's not just raw damage. They do all provide damage, but in terms of how you approach your enemies, there is a marked difference. There are certain benefits that each are going to have. They're going to provide certain things. Sarutahiko's Grace is entirely about Yokai Shift. That's like what it's about. It's about you can effectively play that Grace to get in and out of Yokai Shift like all the time. It is ridiculous. Amino Uzume's Grace is about playing evasively. Akala's Grace is about being a blocking machine. Amaterasu is like a life regeneration thing. There's these marked strengths that each of them has. They all provide damage because the developers, I feel, wanted to make sure that no one Grace greatly overpowered others. I'm sure there's calculations.
Is there
about,
any
this
other
is the best
bonus
one.
apart from damage?
Yes. For example, the Magic Grace, like the de facto Magic Grace, it powers up your magic in general. You get things like reduce the defense of your opponents. If you hit them with Onmyo Magic, your Onmyo Magic's more powerful. You do more damage with your Onmyo Magic. And then you don't consume Onmyo Magic as often. And then if you use Onmyo Magic and then attack, you can get your Onmyo Magic back. So if you like using, say, familiar talismans, well, you can effectively have infinite of those with certain conditions. You don't have to worry about running out of jutsu. Like, that's kind of huge. Normal gameplay prevents that entirely. Susano's Grace is pretty big too, and is very popular because its 6 and 7 piece bonuses are huge. Versatility basically encourages you to use as many different active skills as possible to get a damage boost, which is good because at least it's encouraging you to use many different skills. And then it gives you Mystic Dyad on all. Every single weapon will be able to have 2 Mystic Arts at the same time. Like, that's kind of huge. So and that changes how you approach using certain weapons. There's certain benefits. I mean, certain weapons are just strictly amazing once you have both Mystic Arts. So like dual swords, now every time you attack, you get key reduction and a defense benefit. Kusarigama gets a massive power boost, so does Split Staff, so does Switchclave. Like almost everything except
But the spear, you get fucked.
Well, spear, you just get screwed over. But I think by and large, the idea of being able to have both Mystic Arts on all weapons is pretty huge. That's a definite difference. And as I was saying with the Yokai thing, just being able to effectively go in and out of Yokai Shift at will is huge as well.
If only Yokai Shift was cool.
I do think that Yokai Shift could be cooler. I think that
it's not that it could just be cooler. I honestly think it's just so bare bones. Like, how did it come out in this way?
I think one thing that probably would just make it more enjoyable is if they had stance-based play. Like, that would be enough. I think if there was a meaning to having, say, high stance stuff, mid stance stuff, and low stance stuff with like a skill or two for each of those, that probably would be enough.
Right.
I think that would make it better than just say, all right, I have like 2 mechanics to work with it, and I got 3 soul cores attached to it. I mean, I still find it more interesting than Living Weapon, but by and large, I think Yokai Shift could be better. And I was admittedly a little disappointed that all they added in DLC 3 for the Shiftling stuff was just like empowered abilities for the whole triangle stuff. I'm like, they're cool, but I'm like, this doesn't really change much in my opinion. Yeah. So I am disheartened by that. But again, the ability to be able to, I guess, just keep Yokai Shift up at all times is admittedly pretty huge. I can even talk about how the old sets, most people are just like, hey, these old sets suck. Like, why am I going to go for these bonuses? But they've added some pretty meaningful, and some are very clearly better than others. Let me see if I can find a decent. Some plus bonuses for the sets now are like really very clearly amazingly powerful. And some are just like kind of whatever. But they do present interesting choices for at least what you could do. So Cross Sickles plus Kingos, this is an interesting one at the very least. It fits the theme, but now the 6+ bonus is Finishing Flare, and Finishing Flare basically is more key damage, or I guess the less key your opponent has, your attack basically scales with how their key levels are. So if you do a grapple or a final blow against a winded enemy and whatnot, you get more damage. So it's like a damage boost based on that, which kind of helps. I believe Finishing Flare isn't that great, but again, it fits the theme of trying to do key damage, so it could be an option. I thought the Hugo Director's set, the Honor and Harmony, had a pretty cool 6+ bonus. So it's kind of supports doing on-mail magic with some sword stuff, but then now the 6+ bonus basically allows you similar benefits to Tsukiyomi's Grace, which is, hey, empowered on-mail magic. Now you can basically refill your on-mail magic by just attacking. So it's like, okay, that makes it a lot more appealing than before. Maybe I don't have to go for Tsukiyomi's Grace if I don't want to. Maybe I could, work with this. So it at least provides some interesting choices. Let me see if I can find one more. Hell, even Golden Boy, the archer set from Imagawa, the dude with the black teeth. A 7+ bonus is now they have they give you a damage bonus that scales off of your bow damage. So maybe there could be some interesting builds that are based off of bow damage for a heavy character. I don't know. I think the shittiest one I've seen has been Kintaro's Plus. It's like the 6+ bonus is like increase attack and defense by 200. I'm like, yeah, I don't give a shit about that. What difference is 200 attack gonna make? Like, I just don't see the appeal to that. But again, the fact that there are interesting choices and interesting options, and they've made things a bit more viable for old sets, is at least something worth praising. I'm happy about it, even if they missed the mark on certain ones. Like, cool. It allows these things to compete with past sets. Now, I again, like you, don't give a flying fuck about builds personally. Like, I mean, I have a build, but by and large, it's not like any massive damage thing. I'm using Ame no Uzume's Grace for the passive benefits as opposed to like, hey, I want Death Dancer. I could get Death Dancer, but I just don't need it because it would kind of go against the way I like to play. And then I use things that reduce my key consumption, and like, that's it. That's like all I care for. That's it. That's literally it. I got some corruption and 0 key enemy support, but by and large, it's like I'm not that big on it. So I get where you're coming from, but I think for players who may not be as, I guess, crazy as me, having these interesting build play styles is something I think that is interesting for them. Do I think it could be normalized a little better? Yeah. Like the fact that one-shot build abuse exists is kind of, I think, antithetical to the game, because being able to one-shot a boss kind of, in my mind, cheapens the reward of being able to triumph over a boss. Like you've earned it, but again, I'm not, that's kind of out of my I can't really affect that much change in that regard.
Yeah.
And I think if the developers really didn't want that to be a thing, they probably wouldn't have made it a thing by now. But it's in the game. Players can stack all sorts of crazy shit. You can now I think, what is it? Vika Luca has created some like nonstop Epon spam, which I'm happy about personally. But because Epon is love and Epon is life, all that shit. But the fact that he could spam a soul core endlessly, just that's it, was like ridiculous. And it's like, okay, some crazy interactions. And again, it's probably just difficult from a balance perspective to account for everything. I know the director himself was surprised when poison builds were pretty popular back in the early new game cycles, but still, I don't know. I think the build stuff that they've added into this game, bottom line, has been more interesting. It appeals to me, and I don't give a shit about builds, more or less. But I don't know how they can manage it. They can't really address too much of it now. It'll just have to be they start from a new slate, and I think that's pretty much all we can really hope for in that respect.
Mm.
Feel bad for being a Debbie Downer.
Wait, what?
Oh, I feel bad for being a Debbie Downer. It feels so sad. I'm here
What is a
talking
Debbie
about
Downer?
builds. What's a Debbie Downer? Basically someone who kills the mood.
Oh, well, it's fine, I guess, I have to accept the fact that Nioh 2 will always have builds and will always have loot, even though I personally may not want it to have it. But
Right.
that's fine. Actually, I really don't care about it too much. At first, especially when I was in the Discord server, I did care about that kind of stuff. That small is menial stuff. But recently, I've been realizing that I have more fundamental issues, not just with small stuff that we could argue that, they feel like we're add-ons, but like fundamental issues with the game, like things that rest on the very foundations of how the game has been coded and designed. So
Sure, let's talk about that.
We're talking about Yokai Shift, but just in general, the way the demonic aspects have been handled, I think it wasn't very well done. Not because I don't like the way, for example, we can use Yokai Skills and the way that they have adapted the mechanics that they've chosen. I do like how it does allow for combo play, but my problem is a bit more fundamental. It's with the reasoning
Sure.
used. It's like, okay, we're supposed to be half demon, half human. So in a way, you can say that the aim of the game is to make us feel demons, something that we couldn't do in the first Nioh, right? So we could say,
Right.
like, okay, the game is just trying to make us like feel like a demon half of the times. But the way they've done it is very disjointed, because we got the kit from Nioh 1, and then completely outside of that, we have the Yokai Skills, the Yokai Shift, and so the Yokai Skills, Yokai Shift, and I really dislike how just completely separate from everything we had in Nioh 1. It's like we had the human stuff, and then we have the demon stuff, but they don't really coincide with each other, at least thematically. Like, of course, we can do a normal attack in human form, and then do an Ippon-Datra or like a flash attack into Onibi's soul core. That's not really what I'm getting at. It's that when you're using your normal attacks, you really don't feel like a demon. Like, it's just, you feel like a human, and then you feel like a demon, but you never feel like you're both. Like, when you wield a sword, you feel as weak as a weapon, but in reality, what they really should have done is that when you just swing the sword normally, there should just be a huge difference between normal, like humans that you're fighting, and you. Like, you should feel like a demon, but it shouldn't really come like, oh, now I can use my demon powers. Like, it feels very detached. And while I do like the dynamism of it, that once you do master the soul cores, you're able to make really cool combos, and it does have its own appeal in a way. I really don't like how, if I don't have my anima bar completely filled up, I feel like a weak, worthless human, and that kind of clashes thematically. I feel like the way they should have done it, and this is just my own idea, and it just kind of shows what I value in a game, is that maybe we should be able to use, like, completely forget all that Symphony of the Night kind of like abilities that they use, like taking it from enemies. I would really just focus on the Yokai Shift, and instead of it being just a separate thing that you activate 5% of the time, make it like a 50-50 thing. Now, when you're in Yokai Shift, instead of using like those unique weapons, you would just use the same weapon you already have, but have them in your normal moveset, the qualities of like Brute, Phantom, and Feral. So what I mean by this is, okay, instead of having a completely detached moveset, when you do heavy attack with a single sword, when you're in Brute, you have more power. You have like the ability, for example, to cut through guards, because that's what a Brute would do, or grapple enemies. Like demonic elements fused into the human gameplay, rather than having demonic attacks and human attacks.
Yeah, that actually does sound like a really cool idea, and I can't believe I never had thought of it until you had mentioned it. I do completely agree that there is definitely this big separation between human and yokai mechanics. It's not like I'm really going in between the two forms. The character being a shiftling is more of an afterthought, all things considered. Yeah. Like even in this story, it's like, okay, I guess she doesn't want to become a yokai. I'm like, why not? I thought she can do both, but whatever. Like in the first level, I'm like, wait, I guess she lost control over herself. Maybe there's some mythological reason for this. I don't know. But gameplay wise, yeah, I certainly think what you just suggested does sound really cool. Like, yeah, I've wanted to mess around with Yokai Shift, all things considered, and I can't because, one, the way that I play pretty much prevents it, and second, it's like, no, I even if I get into Yokai Shift, I just can't interact with the various mechanics that you are referencing. Like, I can't use my normal weapon. That'd be kind of cool, as opposed to something entirely disjointed. Now, what I was talking about before is that I wish that they added some more depth to the shiftling form, just period. Even just stances would help. Or I know one of the criticisms from various players is that living weapon is better than Yokai Shift. Now, I disagree with that, but I certainly think the fact that living weapon had 7 different options depending on the weapon type, that general idea, that philosophy could have been implemented for Yokai Shift. That would make it more meaningful. So, now we've got 11 weapons in the game. What if that modified your Yokai Shift stuff? Just something different, who knows? Or what if there were unique attack strings, that were extra special and had that extra heavy punch, so to speak, that you're talking about? Or I think just a more interesting way to incorporate Yokai Shift would have served the game better. So I do agree with you in that respect. How that would play out, I don't know, but I do imagine that the developers, given their track record, would be able to find an interesting way to incorporate that. I think their method of having builds be good for playstyles is very telling of how creative they can be. The new abilities that they added courtesy of the free update overall pretty much hit everything and then some. I just want more personally. So I feel that they could apply the same sort of things to the Yokai Shift mechanic as well. Because like I said before, I really want to be able to mess around with Yokai Shift. But it's just, as you said, it does feel very disjointed. Yes. I think the reason for that may be something, and this is pure speculation, but I think a lot of the yokai mechanics and whatnot kind of got added towards the end of the development cycle, especially after the alpha. And so I imagine they didn't have the time or ability to really hammer out exactly what they would like to have done. The skills, the traditional combat from Nioh 1 in general works really well. I think their enemy design is overall really cool in terms of cool factor, fighting factor, just whatever. I mean, barring a few things here and there. But I think when it came to the burst counter mechanic, the yokai shift mechanic, like really all the specifics, I think they just may not have had as much time as they may have liked, which is unfortunate. And so, again, I think at this point, they can't really... They're probably just going to work on a future title and just take the lessons from that. But Would you say that DMC did a good job in terms of having you go between the forms, when you have your devil trigger and whatnot with Dante?
Well, I'm not much of a Devil May Cry player. So,
Okay.
Wait, hold up. It's been a while. I guess my suggestion kind of like resembles how Devil Trigger works in the game. I do remember how when you activate Devil Trigger, at least in Devil May Cry 3, your form would change based on that. But personally, I didn't like Devil Trigger that much because, well, actually, you know what? Let's not think about DMC3. Let's think about DMC1. I really like how they did it in that game because, I mean, there's only 2 weapons, but it really embodies that concept of being a half demonic rhythm because, okay, when you have your Alistair combos, like the main sword, right? You got your standard combos, you got round trip, all that cool stuff. But when you activate into devil form, like a lot of the properties of your moves do change. Like you're able to go into the air and do this like drilling move. Your gunshots become into lightning. Yeah, that's actually the aspect that I really like the most. That they took the boring guns and they made them cool in Devil Trigger, or how with Ifrit in Devil May Cry 1, right? When you drop down, I forgot what's the move, but when you jump and then press the triangle button, like the attack button, right? In Devil Trigger form, it will like cause this huge eruption. And that's what I really want to see from the yokai shift, like taking what's already there and just adding flair or extra mechanics that make it more meaningful, but are also embodying the theme of becoming a demon. Like this is what a human can do, and then this is what a demon can do. But as of right now, because they're so disjointed, doing an Ippon Dato attack with a normal high sense combo, there's like no parallel. So DMC1, I think, would be a really good base. I personally feel like DMC3, DMC4, I haven't played DMC5, but those games did it way worse. There wasn't as much effect with Devil Trigger, but I'm not a Devil May Cry player, so that's all I really want to say.
I see what you mean, and it does seem like...
You played Devil May Cry 1?
No, I actually really haven't touched the DMC series. I only mostly know about it through other people. But
Devil May Cry 1 is the best, by the way.
All right, that has been said publicly. So
exactly.
Nioh's approach to that, I guess it certainly does feel quite disjointed. I do completely agree with you on that. Their method to, I guess, empowering your abilities has been via the arcanas. You can attach certain elemental things. Now, I do think they could have had an opportunity, as you're saying, to really hammer out the sense that you are this, I guess, overpowered being of sort. Just having like actual shiftling infused abilities, on occasion that work with your anima. That would certainly be pretty cool. And then incorporating that with, say, the soul cores. I do like the soul cores, but I certainly think that in the hands of someone who's far more creative than I am, I think your suggestion would probably fare better in terms of overall interest level and draw when it comes to this game. I have no doubt that if the developers had more time, had more energy and resources to do what they do best, I think Nioh 2 could have been a far better product than it is. And it's already pretty damn good, in my opinion.
Maybe they set as a bar really quickly early in development, the whole being able to use enemies' power as the main gimmick of demon form, and that maybe took out so much time because, it seems like a simple idea, but like think about how many extra attacks they've added, right? Maybe that's just so much development time that they weren't really able to consider ideas similar to what I've stated. And maybe that was just a bad error in their planning. Like, oh, it'll be so cool if we can do what the enemies do. Yeah, let's add that. And then that ends up taking so much of the development time. Because I remember when the Nioh 2 Alpha came, like people were like, there really isn't that much new. So I'm guessing that the yokai abilities, those must have taken up more time than they expected initially.
Right. And again, we just don't really know. But
exactly, they should tell us.
They should tell us if hopefully they can. I hope that I know the community manager master, he has his hands full, and I can only imagine what he has to deal with. And so it just makes me think, how overworked are the staff overall? What's their budget? It's just, there's so many different things I'd like to know. Now, some of it I would never be able to learn because of company reasons, but still, just being able to understand their position would really help, I think, the player base really empathize with them, be able to address issues. Yes. As you said, I know you've talked about machine gun flux to weapon swap with specific weapons with timely guards. Now, just being able to see, hey, is there a way we can work with this? Why is this the case? This is what would happen if we tried to address this. Just something so that we could get some satisfaction, as opposed to complete silence, which pretty much infuriates people. Now, and I guess if, like, for example, I'm hoping that they address one of the new human bosses, the monk in DLC 3, Kukai, or whatever his name is.
Oh, yes. I've seen you rage against it, Poofy.
Yeah, the rage is fine. Call me Poofy though. That's killing me, man.
Yeah,
that's killing me.
Hyper armor. Poofy, do you like the hyper armor that Team Ninja keeps putting on the game?
Here's my honest stance on hyper armor. I think hyper armor definitely has a place. I think it can be appropriate and it can make certain fights better. But I think an over reliance on hyper armor, and especially with the monk's case, kind of is annoying. I don't mind that he has hyper armor per se. I mind that he has hyper armor for the entire duration of the fight afterwards. It's like, really? I can't do anything?
Yeah.
Like,
it's like hyper armor. Oh, wait, no, you keep going.
Oh, my frustration with him is just like, all right, 30% he is now, like, he has hyper armor the whole time. Like, okay, with the diminishing returns of things like the key debuff from burst counters, which I didn't even know was a thing originally. But if you don't know, burst counters against humans will reduce their key recovery dramatically, which is really helpful. But with how I play, and I do play pretty low damage, all things considered, so eventually what happens is there's a diminishing return on any debuffs whatsoever you put on them. So players may have noticed this, like, hey, first time I apply Sloth on a guy, easy peasy. Then like the fifth time you try to do it, you have to apply it like 2-3 times. And so what happens is, against the monk, let's say I get a burst counter down, so he'll start reeling back. And normally against humans, you can knock them down to get a final blow, which does help a lot, and then you can keep the pressure going. So it's like, all right, I took a risk, I got a reward. With him, you cannot knock him down, and the thing is, he has hyper armor and insane key recovery, and he already has a key consumption buff. And then on top of that, he can purge debuffs because he has, like, I guess, Sacred Ash or something. But he'll, like, purify himself from time to time if you leave him unattended. But because he has hyper armor, you cannot interrupt him unless he does a burst counter. So what I ended up doing was just doing Backwave Tempest Final Blow nonstop. Anytime I did anything but that, he was able to punish me. And if you play on Wise difficulty or above, you have to contend with his ability to lifesteal and health regeneration. So you're going to play very differently. Like, I normally try to be as aggressive as possible, but I just really couldn't against him. I don't even mind the fact that he spams like a bajillion waterfall. It's just I'm so focused on the fact that, hey, he has hyper armor and there's nothing I can do to interact with him. And that made him, I think, the most unfun boss so far. I think just the most unfun boss in Nioh 2. Like, for me, Saito Toshimitsu hit that. But then I was like, dude, at least with Saito, he's really frustrating, but I can actually fight him and I can work with him. And I know how to do it and whatnot, which probably does form a big part of my opinion. But then with the monk, it's like, okay, he has an infinite hyper armor. What do you want me to do? Like, are you kidding me? Like, he has infinite hyper armor with a shit ton of key regen. Like, what do you expect? I can't get him out of key. All right, I literally cannot get him out of key because he'll just out regen it and then just power through and then kill me. So I'm not going to bother. I'm going to play safe. And that's pretty much been the experience I've seen from many players. White Goat, I think, got legitimately pissed off at the opponent, too. He's had issues with Saito Toshimitsu, too. Who else?
I think his name is Rainfall. The guy with who used to have the Yuki Onna profile picture.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But it's just been
I'm pretty sure, like, I saw his stream, he got so pissed.
Yeah, I know Zelot got pissed too. He's like, what the hell is this shit? No, like, for me, the first 2/3 of the fight, I'm like, all right, he seems pretty challenging. There's a lot of cool things. Like, ooh, this is cool, this is that. And then hyper armor phase, I'm like, I literally cannot get his health down at all because I can't pressure him whatsoever.
Hyper armor always, like, reduces interactivity, and that's what I really dislike. And I feel like it's kind of to make up for how the AI can be sometimes, because even though it can be quite aggressive when it needs to be, their strategy is very limited. Like they just approach you and that's all they do. They have like no sense of self-preservation. Like they sometimes walk around you, but it doesn't really mean much. And that's why I feel like they even add hyper armor. It's kind of like a cop-out mechanic in a sense, like, oh, we don't want you to stun lock the bosses. So instead of giving them, hard AI that will make them react against you, we'll just give them hyper armor so they can continue the fight. But that just reduces your options so much, and it completely halts the pace of the fight. Because in PvP, people aren't complaining about being stun locked, because it literally is impossible for that to happen, because people will try to space around opponents. They have their own strategies, and they will dodge effectively. But the AI in Nioh 2, it's very lacking, and that's why I feel like they're using the hyper to kind of like hide the fact of how bad it actually is. So honestly, if I had to give Team Ninja like any advice, like above everything we've just said right now, like ignore the Yokai Shift Tug, ignore the Machine Gun Floats to Weapon Switch, like ignore everything I've said. Like if you have to, right? Obviously, if you can add it, then please do. But it's just to really improve the AI, because it will like allow them to not have to put as much hyper armor. Why put hyper armor in Maeda Toshi if his AI is smart enough to not get stun locked?
Yeah, speaking of Maeda Toshi, it's kind of funny when he starts to like Rainbow Ruse afterwards. So they're like, he will just do that over and over again. I'm like, what the hell is this? It's kind of funny. But I definitely think hyper armor is okay in certain situations. I think having it for, say, like high power moves that have like a long duration or whatever from like a heavy target makes sense. So
I understand your point, but I would like go against the other direction. Like ideally, there would be no hyper armor at all.
I suppose if human AI was overall more well-rounded, yeah, you wouldn't have the need for hyper armor. Even with hyper armor is a band-aid on the situation. I can agree with that. You were saying?
The big yokai, like I guess a lot of games have adopted this thing that, oh, if the enemy's big, they won't flinch or stagger when you hit them. But I mean, if you get like an MMA fighter that's super buff and you throw a cat at him, like the cat bites him, he will flinch when the cat bites him. And just because the cat is way smaller than the MMA fighter doesn't mean that he won't flinch or react to it. Like he can be as stern as he wants to be, but like even if it's a small thing, they can still make you stagger. Or when like a mosquito is flying around you, even though it's small as shit, right? You're still reacting to what they're doing. So I feel like it's a very weird abstraction that hyper armor has been, because all things in games are abstraction. Like obviously, I do understand the logic that a small enemy will not have as much leverage against a big enemy, and that's why they add hyper armor. But in the end, it's just kind of abstract, because in real life that doesn't really happen. It's just an approximation. But that hyper armor has been around since the beginning, like since the 80s in side scrollers. Like when you shoot at a boss, they don't react, but it's such an old mechanics, and I honestly wish that they do expand upon it rather than just leave it the way they are. But hopefully there's a game later down the line that actually kind of like removes hyper armor, and that's a better abstraction, because we've been dealing with it for so long.
I can see that. I think bosses like Honda Telekatsu are appropriate for hyper armor when Obsidian Armor Samurai has that. I think it's appropriate given that they're tanks. Like it makes thematic sense. It's usually like I find it really odd when. I mean, I guess there should be some conditions applied to hyper armor. Strangely enough, I think when your character performs beyond infinity, I think you have hyper armor for most, if not all of it, which is rather surprising. I was like, I get interrupted with like anything. Why is this the case? Or Swords Flowing Shadow has it as well. And Axe, for example, I think is a good example of a weapon that it makes sense for it to have hyper armor. It fits it thematically and whatnot. Right. So, it's a long charging moves. Like, okay, you're very vulnerable to get hit, but getting interrupted with long animation abilities would feel really bad for the Axe. And so that's something they rectified in Nioh 2. So Axe is now like a powerhouse weapon. And so I'll do abilities like Rumbling Earth and I'll have hyper armor during it. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of feels reasonable. Let's say a lighter weapon like Sword doesn't really make sense for it to have hyper armor overall. I know abilities like Severing Spin perhaps could be rebalanced, so that maybe it has hyper armor or anything like that. But overall, thematically, I wouldn't expect a sword player to have hyper armor nearly as much as, say, someone using the axe or the odachi or any of these hefty, powerful weapons. I think there should be an attachment of hyper armor to a lot of heft, a lot of power, or some special circumstances. And I think in general with humans, the bigger frustration is simply that humans, it's very difficult to figure out a consistency with them. Certain human enemies fold like paper, other ones are effectively just massive walls. And when there's this assumption that the character player, a player character and human opponents will kind of be on even footing. And so because of that assumption, it can be extra frustrating when a human boss who, say, is doing a lot of the same things as the player basically seems to have things that go against, so to speak, the rules of engagement. So that can be an extra source of frustration. Now, one thing that I know the developers have done, and this is something that's been stated, that they actually did want to more or less move away from human opponents from Nioh 1 to Nioh 2. So if you take a look overall at just the scope of enemies that are in Nioh 2, by and large, they're yokai opponents. Most of the bosses are yokai, like all the time. Whereas in Nioh 1, it was far more focused on samurai interactions. So there is that to consider. But I do think that human enemies overall could be improved. For me, if I had to name two, actually three, my top three, and right now this is the order that I think need to be addressed. For me, I think the monk is number one because of that hyper armor thing. That one is so obvious to anybody who's played him. It should be the first thing to be adjusted. Saito Toshimitsu is number two in my opinion. He's really fast, but the irony is that his human form is far deadlier and scarier than his yokai form, and you'd think it'd be the other way around. Unlike Ryomen Sukuna is a complete pushover compared to Saito Toshimitsu. I'm like, but shouldn't it be the other way around? And then third is actually Sakata Kintoki. That dude just...
Yeah, bro. Oh my god.
Dude, that guy pisses me off. There is a logic and reason to him, but anytime I fought him, even with Yokai Skills, he just has like insane ki regeneration, takes like no ki damage, and it's just a very frustrating experience. And then you compare it to like other enemies, like whatever. One boss that I actually don't think needs to be modified that much, and I expect players to disagree with this, is Ren Hayabusa. The strict reason being that he is meant to be from Ninja Gaiden. Huh?
He doesn't have hyper.
Well, not... Does he? No. What about during his burst attacks?
Well, yeah, but that's burst attacks. That's just a universal feature. I mean, like anything else.
Well, then perhaps I should expand my criteria. My criteria is based on human bosses that I think need to be reworked. I don't think Ren Hayabusa needs that much of a rework.
I think damage could be lowered, and the reason why I say this is because in Ninja Gaiden, if you spam weak attacks against blocking opponents, you will get wrecked. But here, he spams weak attacks and he breaks your guard immediately, which I thought wasn't very faithful to Ninja Gaiden. But otherwise, I do like how they designed Ren Hayabusa. There was like barely any hyper armor, and that's what made it so much more fun.
Right, he is really difficult. Now, the increased key damage is also because of Curse of the Wise and Curse of the Nioh buffs, and you want to get rid of that immediately, especially on him.
But even without that, his key damage is insane.
Yeah, it is insane as it is. He has a ton of break.
I was TN, but...
So, potentially that could be something, but he would be like number 4. The reason why if I don't think he needs to be adjusted that much is simply because he's meant to be from Ninja Gaiden. So Ninja Gaiden is going to be naturally a very different rule set, and I would expect it would fall within expectations for him to be like a broken enemy to work with. And he has it coded in his AI. Anytime you run out of ki, he will go for the Azuna drop, and you're pretty much dead. Like it fits thematically at least, even if it's not perfectly balanced, as we're both agreeing upon. Now you've got Ancient Nioh Tengu, who actually I think is a lot easier to work with compared to other enemies. But again, she doesn't fit because she's yokai, technically, and they play by a different rule set, which seems to be overall consistent amongst all the yokai. I don't hear nearly as many complaints about yokai as I do about human enemies over and over and over again. Why many skill-based players or technical players really want parry disabled is because, hey, We want to be able to deal with stuff we perceive as bullshit. Parry disabled has no value against yokai. It's purely based for blocking human opponents that just block spam. You want to be able to throw out your attacks and not feel like you can't do so. And yeah, but we'll just have to see. I don't think they're going to add parry disabled back into the game. I think apparently in the game. I personally don't care for parry disabled, but I can understand why people do. It's, in my mind, just a band-aid to an overall problem. If we didn't have the issues like you're talking about, things like hyper armor or enemies that block, if we had more, as you said, interesting human AI to work with, in, say, perhaps the same vein as PvP, perhaps, which unfortunately won't be released, but if we had more interesting human AI, a lot of these things wouldn't come to play. But
that's why I wanted PvP in, because the AI was so lacking. So at the very least, I wanted to test my skills against opponents who use different tactics. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. So
yeah, unfortunately, that's not the case. The closest thing we're going to get to PvP is either just the current dojos, which that's the closest thing to PvP AI. And then my hope is that when the game comes out on PC, there will be an extensive modding community that just like adds their own PvP and balance patches.
I don't know.
That's my hope. That would be cool.
I really don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think our community is that tight-knit for those kind of intensive modding projects to happen, because they do take a long time. I remember I was reading about Melee's fan-added rollback netcode and how the guy who added it had to like quit his job just to make it happen. So I don't think there's that kind of passion in our community. Like there's passion for the skill, but for us to create, there should be like someone who, first of all, is within our skill players for them to want to do this, and also have the time to do it, and also have the expertise to do it. And I just want to be realistic with everyone, because I'm guilty of giving myself like really high expectations. Oh, this will happen. This game will have a mod in the future, but not every game is going to be like Minecraft or Skyrim that they're going to get lucky. And I don't think Nioh 2 is going to get lucky. So lower your expectations. But hey, that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Hopefully.
Hey, I hope we're wrong about that too. So apparently there are actually people who've modded Nioh 2 for the PS4 as it is. I know Zandorum was talking about that.
Oh, really? What kind of mods?
I don't remember the full scope, but I don't know if it was simple things like patch rollbacks or if it was like adjustments to certain things are there. But they're trying to figure that out. Now, in the Discord that I'm a part of, I haven't really heard people talk about mods as much as just hoping for them. But it's just, again, something I hope for. Nioh 1 didn't really have that. It'd be great if Nioh 2 had that. I think it'd be a great benefit to it. But again, it seems like overall support for Nioh 2 and whatnot is kind of coming at the end. My only hope is that if Nioh 2 is going off on the wayside, that whatever IP will come out next will basically do what I'd like and then some. I think the creativity that's been put forth by this game series, Nioh and Nioh 2, has certainly been quite great. And I just hope that continues. That's all I can say, unfortunately.
Damn, we really talked about a lot of things.
Yes, we did. I just looked at the time, a little over 2 hours. And I could tell I could talk about a lot more with you. But unfortunately, I think we should wrap this up. Before we go, though, what are the last major things that you'd like to address? Let's just talk about one major topic that that you want to talk about, but we just didn't get to.
It's an extension of hyper armor. It's just that... Sure. In Melee, I keep referencing this, Super Smash Bros. Melee. I think, okay, so, I always say, remove this, remove that, change it with a more interesting mechanics. With Hyper Armor, I have the same opinion. I wish Hyper Armor is removed and that they change it with something more interesting. But if they were to stick with a Hyper Armor idea, I think Melee has a really good system. It's called crouch canceling, and essentially in that game, when you're crouching, you reduce the hit stun of what your opponents are doing by around 1/3, and therefore you're able to do like an attack without getting interrupted, even though you're being hit at low percentages. And what I really like about crouch canceling is that, I really hate it when I'm playing an opponent and they do it, and I'm like, God damn it, I got hit by that, and I hate hyper, but at the very least, it's very reasonable. Because first of all, it's just a whole mechanic that you have to be crouching. Okay, so there's actually some logic behind it. You aren't just getting hyper armored out of nowhere because TN was too lazy to make good AI. No, it isn't because of that. It's because there's a mechanic around it, and also because it has its actual counterplay. Hold up, I'm getting kind of thirsty. Yes, there's actual counterplay to crouch canceling because there's high percentage. Like if you're a high percentage, it doesn't work, and it actually is more punishing. You can use grabs to beat crouch canceling. You can space around crouch canceling. It is very telegraphed. It restricts your opponent, and it isn't like a complete foolproof strategy. So crouch canceling, I really suggest viewers here, and you as well, should look up into it if you're interested, is hyper armor done well, because there's actual counterplay which increases interactivity. And what's actually bad about crouch canceling is for characters who do not have the options to deal with it. And that kind of reminds me of playing Nioh 2. Like if you're playing low tier characters in melee, they can't deal with crouch canceling, and it's the same as playing Nioh 2. Like you want to be these hyper armor opponents, but there's absolutely no options, because any options just resulting at you have to predict the hyper armor, which is very non-interactive. But I really like how when characters are able to beat crouch canceling with safe, reasonable options, but still make crouch canceling a good option. So ideally, TN, if you're watching this, not to make hyper armor in Nioh 2 the same way as crouch canceling, but rather to take inspiration of how they took hyper armor and made it into a fun, meaningful mechanic that has counterplay, and that overall increases interactivity compared to Nioh 2's hyper armor, which decreases interactivity. So I don't know if we ever have another podcast again, I could talk about it in more depth, but yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Okay, well, I do hope that Team Ninja, if I seriously doubt they listen to this, but I do hope that a lot of the ideas that you put forth are at least recognized and incorporated in some new way. You
like not literally, but the ideas behind them,
right, the spirit behind it. Maybe not necessarily like even the stuff that I've come up with, for my ideas. I'm like, wow, they found a better way to do that. Like at best, I'm like, I hope that builds encourage play styles. And I'm like, oh, well, now that they do, that's great. That's awesome. And they're really cool, interesting ways for a player like me. So they have great creativity. And I just hope that they're able to continue to really flush that out. Be able to create, as you're saying, meaningful, interactive sort of situations pretty much at all times. So not things like, hey, I can't do anything against his opponent because he has infinite hyper armor. Or, oh, hey, I feel like I'm not that encouraged to use shifting mechanics because it feels rather bare bones. I wish there was a more unique fusion of human and shifting mechanics and so on and so forth. And most, if not importantly, just tell us about it. Tell us what you're doing. We want to know what's going behind the scene. Nioh's fan base, however niche and small it may be, is very much devoted to it. No matter what type of player you are, very vocal, very devoted to it, because as you had said at the beginning, we care a lot about this game. We may criticize it, but at the end of the day, with a player like myself, and I got like 1,000 hours on Nioh 2, I know players who have like 3,000 hours on Nioh 2. I'm like, dude, how do you play 3 times the amount that I have? But players are very passionate and very devoted to this game, and we all just want to make it better. So I think that is probably going to be the takeaway from this podcast. Do you have any last closing thoughts you'd like to mention?
Well, Team Ninja, you're probably not watching this, but I'll say it because I want to. Hopefully they reduce the crunch they're probably having, and they come back with some fresh ideas for maybe the next Ninja Gaiden or their next new IP, but hopefully as what's his name, the director's name? I forgot his name.
What were we talking about? The director, Yasuda-san?
Yeah, so Yasuda, he said that he really wanted to take a break because he's been working so much. So hopefully he takes a break. He kind of like disconnects completely from what he's done from Nioh 2. And, he's able to look back at the positives and the negatives, and is able to overall make a better game in the future. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hope so, too. I think despite all our misgivings, we all really enjoy Nioh 2. And
yes, but I hope they disconnect from what they've done.
And we see so much potential in this game, but we imagine even greater potential in future games that come out.
Exactly.
So yeah, thank you so much for your unique perspective, ZerotheHero. Take a sip, take a chug, take a drink. I know you're thirsty, so I will let you go. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And for our viewers, I hope this podcast was informative. Thanks everyone so much for watching, for listening. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Take care and peace out.
Poofy's the real name, I swear.
Oh my god. Bye, guys.
See ya.